welcome to another video. Today it is part 3 of this Butterick 6130 sew along, and today we're going to be sewing the trousers. So let's get started. Okay, we can move on to view D, step 29. Stitch pants front to pants back together at inside leg. You can guess what I'm going to do. I'm going to do it with French seams, and I'm going to do that for pretty much all of the trousers except for the crotch seam. The trouser fronts and the trouser backs do look very similar. Obviously they do have different notches on them, but if you don't want to waste time fiddling around to try and find the notches, I suggest again marking your pieces with a pin like this. Okay, I've sewn my pants front and pants back together at the inside leg, and I've done that with French seams, but my battery died whilst I was doing it, so I don't know how much footage I have caught. But I will be sewing the outer leg together with French seams. The next step, however, is stitch centre seam matching inside leg seam and leaving free above circle on back. Stitch again 1/4 inch 6mm away in seam allowance between notches, trim close to second stitching. Okie dokie. Well, I am going to finish my edge with bias binding because that is my preference. Again, you can pink yours, you can overlock it, you can overcast it. There's lots and lots of different finishing methods, but you want to finish your inside crotch seam now before you sew it together because it will just be so much easier. Ask me how I know. So I'm going to get that done and then we're going to sew it together. Before you sew your bias binding on, you want to press your inner leg seams, and you want to press one towards the back and then the other one towards the front so that you can nest these seams when you come to sew the legs together. Okay, so with the bias binding, you want to sew the right side of the bias binding, so that's the side with the folded edges and you can't see any raw edges, to the wrong side of the trousers, and we're going to do that by lining up the raw edge at the top and lining up the raw edges at the side, and having opened out one of the folds, we're going to stitch in this crease the whole way around, and then we're going to flip it over and top stitch it down. Okay, so I am top stitching the bias binding down, and I'm using my blind hem foot because it has a nice guide and I can move my needle all the way over to the left. So the guide runs up against the edge of the bias binding, and then the needle obviously being moved over to the left top stitches. So I like to push with, I don't pin anything, I push with my right finger to make sure all the fabric is lying flat, and then with my left finger I push the bias binding down and sew. You want to make sure the fabric to the right is all lying nice and flat because you don't want it to pucker or get any bumps in it. The next thing that we're going to do is sew the crotch seam together, and it's going to be all the way down from the front, and I still have my pin in my front pieces so I know which is which because I've covered up my notches when I sewed on this bias binding. So we're going to sew all the way down, and I personally am going to go about 1 inch further past the crotch seam and stop there. I like to use very large zips or very long zips in my jumpsuits because I have a significant difference between my waist and my hips, and I find that with like a normal length zip I struggle to get them over my hips to get them then closed. So I'm going to sew the front together past the crotch seam by about 1.5 inches and stop there. This will also help with getting the invisible zip in nicely because we can close that gap left once we've got the zip in with the regular zipper foot, but again I will show you that when we get there. Okay, so I have the trousers pinned together at the crotch seam, and I've got the two fronts pinned together all the way around, and I'm going to stop around here, and for me I like to put like a orange pin in to remind me that I need to stop. I mean, I haven't pinned the rest of it, but still. The thing that you need to note here is that I have nested my seams, so this seam is going towards the back and this seam is going towards the front, and that just means there won't be too much bulk where these seams meet, and you should get a nice join because you have been able to kind of nest the seams together. That's a quilter's trick that my mum taught me. So I'm going to sew this together at 5/8 of an inch. So the next step is 31. Stitch pants back to pants front at sides, and again we're going to be doing that with a French seam. Okay, so I have the side seams pinned together with the wrong sides together, and I'm going to sew this at 1/4 of an inch. And I have on my regular presser foot, the toe of this is 3/8 of an inch away from the needle, so I actually move the needle over to the right to make it so that it's 1/4 of an inch away, and that way I can keep the entire presser foot over the fabric and it's less likely to get sucked down into the stitch plate. So we'll get this first line of stitching sewn and then we can trim. Once you've got the seam sewn, you then need to trim down the seam allowance by half. So this is now 1/8 of an inch, and I'm going to do that the whole way up both seams. Okay, once you've trimmed that seam, you need to turn it so that the right sides are together and then press the seam, and then you're going to come back and sew at 3/8 of an inch, which will enclose the raw edge. You then want to press this seam towards the back, and that's your French seam done. As ever, if you have any questions at all, please let me know in the comments section down below and I will do my best to answer them for you. I really hope you've enjoyed today's video. If you have, please give it a thumbs up. If you haven't yet, please subscribe, and I will see you again very soon. Bye!